It is dusk, 40,000 years ago, and you've made a terrible mistake. You followed the herd too far. It happened slowly the way these things always do. One more ridge, one more hour of good tracking. The animals kept moving, and you kept following. And the whole time some quiet part of your brain was keeping a thread back to camp. Until somewhere back there, the thread went slack. And now you look up, and the familiar hills are gone. The landmarks you've used your entire life, that particular ridge, that bend in the river, the leaning tree you've known since childhood, none of them are here. This is country you don't recognize. The light is fading. It is getting cold. And somewhere behind you, hours back, is your group, your fire, your family with no way to call them, and no way for them to find you. This was one of the most dangerous things that could happen to a prehistoric human. Not a predator, not a storm. Just this being lost, disoriented in a world with no signs, no roads, no maps, and no second chances. So what do? That is the question for today, and I want to be honest with you about why it matters more than it sounds, because the answer turns out to reveal something genuinely astonishing about the human mind, an ability your ancestors carried as casually as you carry a phone, and that most of us today have almost completely lost. So stick with me, let's get you home. First, let's kill a lie. The lie is the image of the ancient human as a kind of confused wanderer stumbling through the wilderness, getting turned around, lost half the time, surviving mostly by luck. We picture them as the opposite of US. We have GPS, satellites, a map of every inch of the planet, and they had nothing. So surely they were constantly hopelessly lost. It is exactly backwards. A prehistoric human dropped into wild country would have found their way through it with a confidence that would put almost any modern person to shame. Getting truly fatally lost was rare for them, not because the world was easier, but because they were extraordinarily good at not letting it happen. They had to be the ones who didn't become anyone's ancestor. And to understand how, we have to start inside the brain, because the first and most important navigation tool ancient humans had wasn't the sun or the stars. It was a map they carried inside their own heads. Neuroscientists call it the cognitive map, deep in your brain, in a region called the hippocampus. You have specialized cells whose entire job is to track space. Some of them, called place cells, fire when you're in a specific location and nowhere else. Others, called grid cells, lay down a kind of invisible coordinate grid over the world as you move through it. The researchers who discovered these systems won a Nobel Prize for it because what they'd found was, in effect, a positioning system built directly into the mammalian brain. You have a GPS unit in your skull. You were born with it. For an ancient human, this internal map was everything, and it was developed to a degree that is hard for us to even imagine. From the time they could walk, they were learning their landscape. Not as information. Every ridge, every water source, every tree, every game trail, the way the land folded and drained, where the sun rose against which hill in which season. They held an enormous, detailed, three-dimensional model of their territory in their minds, constantly updated, constantly referenced. When you walk through your neighborhood, you barely have to think about where you are. You just know. That effortless knowing, that is your cognitive map doing its quiet work. Now imagine that same sense, but extended over hundreds of square kilometers of wilderness in extraordinary detail as a matter of life and death. That was the baseline. That was just being a competent adult human in the prehistoric world. And we know this part of the brain physically grows with use. There is a famous study of London taxi drivers who have to memorize the city's impossibly tangled web of thousands of streets to earn their license. When researchers scanned their brains, they found that the rear part of the hippocampus, the region that stores spatial memory, was measurably larger than average, and that it grew larger the longer a driver had been working. The brain literally rebuilds itself around the demand to navigate. So picture what hundreds of thousands of years of that demand on every single human did to our species. We were shaped, brain and body, to hold landscapes in our minds. There is also a quieter, constant trick the brain does called dead reckoning. As you move, some part of your mind is automatically keeping a running tally, roughly how far you've gone, in which directions, with how many turns. It is how you can wander through a building and still point back toward the entrance, even with no windows. Ancient humans had this running at full strength all the time, integrating every step of a long day's travel into a continuous sense of where home was relative to their body, even with no landmarks at all. The internal odometer kept ticking, but the cognitive map only covers territory, you know. The real test, the dusk and fading light test, is what you do when you wander past the edge of it, into country you've never seen. And here is where ancient humans had a whole toolkit, layered cue on top of cue, that let them stay oriented almost anywhere. Start with the sky. The sun is the oldest compass there is. It rises in a predictable arc, it sets in a predictable arc, and once you've watched it your whole life, you don't calculate with it, you just feel direction from it. The way you feel the time of day, the length and angle of shadows told them direction and hour at a glance. And at night, the stars took over. The night sky, to an ancient human, was not the faint scatter of dots most of us see now through light pollution. It was a brilliant, wheeling, intricate map memorized in detail. Certain stars rise at certain points on the horizon. The whole sky pivots around a fixed point through the night. People who live under those stars learn them the way you learn the rooms of your house, and they can pull direction out of them effortlessly. Here is how it actually works, and it is simpler than it sounds. The entire night sky appears to rotate over the course of the night, around one nearly fixed point, in the northern hemisphere, close to the star we call Polaris, the North Star. Find that point, and you found true north locked in place while everything else wheels around it. In the southern hemisphere, there is no convenient bright star, but the sky still pivots around a fixed point you can locate using patterns like the Southern Cross. And even the stars that move are useful. A particular star always rises at the same point on the horizon and sets at the same point opposite it. So if you know your stars, the moment one clears the horizon, you have a bearing. Navigators learned long sequences of these rising stars, so that as one climbed too high to be useful, the next was already rising to take its place along the same line of direction, a kind of star-by-star relay that could hold a heading all night long. To a sky-literate human, the darkness wasn't blinding, it was the clearest map of all. Some seafaring peoples developed this into one of the most sophisticated navigation systems humans have ever created, but we'll get to the open ocean, because that story is almost unbelievable. Then there is the land itself, which to a trained eye was covered in directional signs. Wind tends to blow from prevailing directions, and over time it shapes things. It bends the growth of trees, it sculpts sand dunes into consistent patterns, it stacks snow on particular sides. Moss and plant growth often differ between the shaded and sunlit sides of trees and rocks. Rivers flow downhill, always toward larger water, and following water is one of the oldest ways to find your way to a place humans gather. The land has a grain to it, and ancient humans could read that grain. And then there were animals, which is a cue most of us would never think of. Animals move with purpose. Game trails lead to water and good forage. Birds fly toward water at dawn and dusk, and certain birds mean a coastline is near. A prehistoric tracker could read the behavior of other creatures as a living signpost, pointing toward the things that creatures and humans both need. Layer all of this together, the internal map, the sun, the stars, the wind, the water, the plants, the animals, and you start to see why getting hopelessly lost was so rare. An ancient human wasn't relying on any single cue. They were constantly, almost unconsciously, cross-referencing a dozen of them at once, building and rebuilding a picture of where they were. It was less like reading a map and more like a sense. A sixth sense for place that ran in the background of every waking moment. Now I want to show you just how far this could go, because there are human cultures that pushed wayfinding to a level that genuinely sounds like magic, and they're not ancient history. Some of them are alive right now. Let's go to the open ocean. Around 50,000 years ago, humans reached Australia. To get there, they had to cross open water, somewhere between 50 and 90 kilometers of it. Out of sight of land, sail out far enough that the shore behind you drops below the horizon, and there is no landmark anywhere. Just water and sky in every direction, and yet humans crossed that gap to a continent no one had ever seen, on watercraft we have never even found. That is not luck. That is navigation of a kind we still don't fully understand. And then there are the Polynesians, who are the masters of this, the greatest open ocean navigators in human history. Over centuries, Polynesian voyagers settled islands scattered across the Pacific, tiny specks of land separated by thousands of kilometers of empty sea, without compasses, without instruments, without writing. They did it by reading the stars, yes, but also by reading the ocean itself. Master navigators learned to feel the patterns of ocean swells, the way waves bend and reflect around islands you cannot yet see, creating subtle interference patterns a trained navigator can feel through the hull of a canoe in the dark. They watched the flight paths of birds, the color of the sky, the drift of clouds that gather over hidden land. They held the position of dozens of stars and the relationships between islands in memory as a living mental chart. This tradition nearly died out, but it was kept alive by a handful of master navigators, and it has been revived and is being taught again today. It is one of the most extraordinary intellectual achievements of our species, and it was done entirely inside the human mind. And here is something that might change how you think about your own brain. There are languages spoken by real people today that don't have words for left and right. Instead, they use absolute compass directions for everything. Not the cup is to your left, but the cup is to your north. To speak these languages at all, you have to know which way is north at every moment indoors or outdoors in the dark, having just woken up constantly. And the remarkable thing is, the people who speak them simply do. They maintain a perfect sense of direction at all times automatically because their language demands it. Researchers who studied this found that these speakers could point accurately toward distant places in unfamiliar terrain with an ease that left Western scientists stunned. It strongly suggests that this ability, this living compass, isn't some rare gift. It is a latent human capacity that develops powerfully when a culture needs it and quietly withers when it doesn't, which tells you something haunting about what your ancestors were like. They almost certainly all had the constant, effortless sense of direction, the detailed inner map, the reading of sky and land and water. It was normal. It was just what it meant to be a human moving through the world. There's one more system I have to tell you about because it is maybe the most beautiful solution any humans ever found to the problem of not getting lost. In Aboriginal Australian cultures, there are what are often called songlines or dreaming tracks. These are paths across the land, sometimes immense ones, stretching across the entire continent that are encoded in song, story, and ceremony. The lyrics of a songline describe the features of the land in sequence, in order as you travel. The landmarks, the water sources, the turns, which means the song is the map. By knowing the song, a traveler can navigate a route across hundreds of kilometers of country, even country they have never personally walked, because the knowledge of how to cross it has been preserved and passed down in the rhythm and words of the song itself. Think about what that is. It is a navigation system stored not on paper, not in a device, but in music and memory, handed down across countless generations. It turns the entire landscape into something you can sing your way through. Our ancestors didn't just hold maps in their heads. They turned maps into art and art into a way home. So now let's go back to you. Lost at dusk 40,000 years ago, with the light fading. What did you actually do? You didn't panic, because panic gets you killed. You stopped. You used what was left of the daylight to read everything you could. The slope of the land, a direction of water flow, the angle of the setting sun, a lay of the ridges. You worked out roughly which way home was, and if the light was truly gone, you very likely did the wisest thing of all. You stayed put. You found shelter, you stayed warm if you could, and you waited for the sky. Because once the stars came out, you had your map back. And in the morning, with the sun to orient you and the landscape readable again, you began the long walk home, following water, reading the land, cross-checking cue against cue until the country turned familiar again and the thread back to your fire pulled tight. And there were deeper tricks too, the kind that only a lifetime in the land teaches. You could climb. Getting to high ground, a hilltop, a tall tree, a ridge, transforms the problem instantly, because suddenly you can see the shape of the whole country, spot a familiar peak in the distance, or catch the gleam of a river. You could follow water downstream, because water leads to bigger water, and bigger water is where people live and gather. You could look for the smoke of other fires on the horizon at dusk, a sign of human presence pointing the way to help, and you could read the freshness of trails and tracks, including your own, to retrace the path you'd come by. The lost human was not helpless. They were running through a checklist refined over thousands of generations, each step buying them another chance to find the thread again. There is one more thing they had that we underrate badly: other people and shared knowledge. A child grew up listening to the adults describe the country in detail, where the dangerous ground was, where the water failed in dry season, how to get from one place to another. The route was talked about, sung about, rehearsed in story, long before you ever walked it alone. You were rarely navigating from scratch. You were navigating with the accumulated wayfinding wisdom of everyone who had come before you, poured into your mind since birth. And here is the part that I can't stop thinking about, the part nobody tells you. We didn't get better at this. We got worse, dramatically, measurably worse. We have GPS now, and GPS is a genuine marvel. But every time you follow the blue dot without thinking, you're outsourcing the very thing your ancestors spent their whole lives developing. And the brain is ruthless about this. It does not maintain what it does not use. There is real research suggesting that heavy reliance on turn-by-turn navigation is associated with reduced engagement of the hippocampus, the very region that holds your cognitive map. We are quite literally letting the muscle atrophy. We have handed our sense of place to a satellite, and in return, we've forgotten how to know where we are. You've felt it. That moment when your phone dies and you realize you don't actually know the way, in a city you've driven through 100 times, that little flicker of helplessness, your ancestors would not have recognized that feeling. They would not have understood how a competent adult human could fail to know which way home was. Tell them that knowledge wasn't a tool you could lose. It was part of being a person. It was as basic as knowing your own name. We traded it away, and mostly that is fine. It is a reasonable trade, and I'm not going to pretend I'm throwing my phone in a river, but it is worth knowing what we gave up. There was a way of being in the world carried by every human for hundreds of thousands of years, where you were never really lost because the whole landscape was alive with meaning and direction, and you could read it like a face. The sky told you the time and the way, the water told you where people gathered. The wind and the trees and the birds all pointed somewhere. You belonged to the land in a way that meant it would always eventually lead you home. That is what an ancient human did when they got lost. They remembered that they never really were, that the world itself was a map if you knew how to read it, and then they read it, and they walked home. So here is my question for you, and I really do want to know. If your phone died right now in the middle of nowhere with the sun going down, could you find your way home the old way? Could you read the sky, the water, the land, or have we lost something we didn't even notice we were losing? Let me know in the comments. Until then, take care of yourselves and of each other, and I'll see you soon.